I always thought the night smelled different when trouble was brewing. A mix of wet asphalt, cigarette smoke, and a faint whiff of impending doom. There I was, hunkered down in my navy blue '97 Buick with a thermos of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, peering through binoculars that had seen better days. My stakeout spot was outside a dimly lit dive bar that had the sort of neon sign buzzing with the promise of bad decisions. The name's Jack Derringer, a name my parents picked out of a hat full of others they'd considered and thrown away. It had that old-school detective ring to it, but let's face it, the only thing old-school about me was my habit of narrating my life like I was in a noir film. That, and maybe my taste in music. Nothing beats the blues when you're blue, which I perpetually am. The stakeout was supposed to be simple, a personal favor the chief's wife had asked. Catch your friend's cheating husband in the act, snap some photos, and collect a paycheck that wouldn't cover my bar tabs. Easy. Except I'd been outsmarted by a man with the imagination of a cardboard cutout. He never showed. Either he was innocent, or I was incompetent. I was betting on the latter. As I sat there, drowning in self-deprecating thoughts, the universe decided to sprinkle a little absurdity into the mix. A cat, sleek and black as the night itself, sauntered onto the hood of my car, its eyes reflecting the neon glow like twin disco balls. It peered at me with what I could only interpret as feline disdain. I'd been upstaged by a creature that licked itself clean and ate food out of a tin. That's when the universe, with its quirky sense of humor, decided I hadn't had enough. The cat's sudden interest in my surveillance spot was due to a rather raucous commotion from the bar, the very place my quarry was supposed to emerge from. Out stumbled a figure, not the cheating husband, but a drunk who had probably been a patron since the bar's foundation was laid. He tripped over his own feet and landed with his face intimately close to mine, separated only by the glass of the window.
"Evening, detective."
He slurred, his breath fogging up the glass.
"Your cat's making a break for it."
I looked up just in time to see the cat disappear, leaving me with the drunk and a sinking feeling. The night had taken a turn, all right. Not towards trouble, but towards the kind of tragicomedy that seemed to follow me around like a lost dog, or in this case, a stray cat. I sighed and cracked the window.
She's not my cat, and I'm not a detective. I'm a private eye.
"Okay, Mr. Private Eye, but remember, everything's ours in the grand cosmic sense, buddy,"
he replied, as if he'd tapped into the universe's drunken wisdom.
"We're all just, what's the word? Transient?"
Thinking for a second, I said.
Yeah, transient.
I liked that. It had a nice ring to it, like a bell tolling at a funeral for my wasted evening. The drunk eventually staggered off, and I was left alone again with my thoughts and the buzz of the neon sign. It was the perfect time to call it a night, but something about that word, transient, made me stay. Maybe the night had more to offer, or maybe I was just a sucker for punishment. Either way, I was about to find out. As dawn threatened to break, I was about to abandon my post when my cell phone rang. A sound as unwelcomed as a rash in a place you can't scratch in public. I answered, and it was none other than Lieutenant O'Malley, a man whose voice sounded like gravel being churned in a cement mixer.
"Jack, I got a situation,"
he said, cutting right to the chase as he usually did. I was intrigued despite myself.
If this is about your daughter's cat again, I'm not interested.
He chuckled, a sound like the rumble of distant thunder.
Haha. Funny, man. No, it's not about Princess Fluffy, but it's something right up your alley. How quickly can you get to the East End?
The East End was the part of town where dreams went to die, and the sun hesitated to rise.
Give me 20 minutes.
I lied. It would take 10, but I needed the extra time for a splash of whiskey to brace myself for whatever O'Malley had in store. I had been a highly decorated detective in my past life. O'Malley had given me several accolades, but after years of facing monsters and drowning in bottles of Jack and a divorce, I had lost a marble or two. Honestly, if I'm being honest, more like 5. After botching 2 high-profile investigations due to being drunk off my ass, I had no other option but to resign. But O'Malley, ever the pragmatic, always kept me on tap, knowing I'd get results that made him look good. When I arrived, the East End was cloaked in the kind of silence that screamed trouble. The scene was taped off, flashing lights painting the alley in a macabre disco. O'Malley was there, looking like a bear that had been prodded one too many times.
What's the story, O'Malley?
I asked, stepping under the tape.
We got ourselves a serial situation. 3 in a month, all working girls. All killed the same way. Strangled, no signs of a struggle, and then cut up and stitched back together like sick playthings. It's like the perp had their permission or something to get close.
He explained, his eyes scanning the alley as if the shadows might jump out with a confession. I felt a twinge in my gut, the same twinge I got when I looked at my bank balance or thought about my ex.
You think it's a John?
That or someone with a vendetta against working dames.
O'Malley said, scratching his stubbled chin.
And you want me on this because?
I prompted, though I already knew the answer. I was good at finding people who didn't want to be found, and a killer is the ultimate hider.
You've got away with the street folk, Jack. You speak their language, plus I want this done pronto. My guys are already slammed with work, so I need all the help I can get.
He said, which was his way of saying I was as broken as the people we were talking about. The first rays of sunlight began to cut through the gloom, casting long shadows that seemed to hold secrets.
All right, I'm in, but I'm not doing this pro bono.
We'll work out the details later.
O'Malley assured me.
Just find this bastard before he strikes again.
As I looked over the scene, my mind began to narrate, casting me as the weary private eye in a story that was all too real. I was about to step into a world where morality was as murky as the water in the gutter, and I couldn't help but wonder, if I stared into this abyss long enough, would it start staring back into me? With a heavy heart and a head full of questions, I walked into the rising sun, ready to peel back the layers of the East End's darkest corner. Navigating the city's underbelly was like threading a needle with boxing gloves on, clumsy, frustrating, and if you're not careful, you'll end up bleeding. But it was my city, and the neon lights were like beacons in a sea of shadows, drawing me into the depths of the night. The first stop on my descent was the Velvet Chokehold, a nightclub that throbbed with the pulse of the desperate and the deviant. It was the kind of place where secrets were currency, and I was about to make a withdrawal. Behind the bar was a bartender named Gigi, a woman who could tell you your life story with a glance, and who knew the East End like the back of her tattooed hand.
Jack Derringer, as I live and breathe.
She greeted, her voice rich with southern twangy sarcasm that could only be earned through years of serving sinners their poison.
What brings you to this den of virtue?
I'm chasing a ghost, Gigi. You hear anything about a guy who has a thing for the ladies of the night?
I asked, trying to sound casual. She poured a shot of something that looked like it could double as paint remover and slid it across the bar.
Honey, you're going to have to be more specific. In this place, that description fits half the clientele.
Her wink told me she knew more than she let on, but Gigi was a fortress. You didn't breach her walls without the right siege equipment. I downed the shot, feeling it burn a trail of fire down my throat.
Gigi, come on. 3 girls in a month. If I don't stop him, there'll be more. There's got to be talk.
I pressed, feeling the urgency of the ticking clock in my chest. She leaned in, her eyes scanning the room before she spoke.
There's a guy, calls himself the tailor, thinks he's stitching up the world's problems, one dead working girl at a time.
The tailor, huh?
I mused, the name rolling off my tongue like a bad omen.
Yeah, creepy fella. Thinks he's on some holy mission. The girls are scared, Jack. But scared girls don't pay bills, rain or shine. They have to stay open for business.
She said, her eyes dark with the kind of knowledge that comes from seeing too much. I thanked her and slipped out, the neon lights of the Velvet Chokehold winking out behind me like eyes closing on a secret. The night was still young, and the city whispered with the voices of the lost and the damned. The next character in this twisted play was a streetwalker named Candy, a moniker as sweet and as fake as her smile. She was leaning against a lamppost, her face painted with the kind of beauty that was both a weapon and a wound.
Candy, you know a guy called the tailor?
I asked, keeping my voice low. Her laugh was like the tinkle of broken glass.
Do I look like I need a suit?
He's not tailoring suits, he's tailoring crime scenes. He's dangerous, tell me what you've heard.
I warned and implored. Her smile faltered, and she looked up at the neon sign above us, bathing her in a harsh pink light.
He's the boogeyman, Jack. He could be any of the Johns we see daily, but I don't know who it is.
Any idea where I can find him?
I persisted, and with the aid of my friend Ben Franklin, she offered up a major clue. She shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her and making my Ben disappear.
Look, all I heard was to watch out for the man with the thimble, Jack. That's all I can tell you. That's all I've heard.
A man with a thimble. It was like a clue from a fairy tale, and I was far from Prince Charming. But it was something. A thread I could follow into the funhouse. As I moved through the city, the neon lights continued to play their dual role, guiding me and warning me, like sirens calling to a sailor. The dualities within me, the cynic and the idealist, the sinner and the salvager, danced a tango to the rhythm of the night. I knew the deeper I waded into the dark waters of the East End, the murkier the reflection of my own soul would become. But I had a case to solve, and solve it I would, even if it meant getting a little wet. If life were a straight line, I'd have fallen off it long ago. But it's more of a scribble, and in the tangled loops of my own making, I often found myself lost in the digressions. Like now, chasing a ghost through the city's veins, my mind couldn't help but wander to the specters of my past. In the yellowed light of my dingy office, I could see the ghost of Sarah, my ex, the one that got away, literally. She ran off with a vacuum cleaner salesman. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd cleaned out my apartment before she left. That was the last time I mixed business with pleasure. Private eyes and domestic bliss make for a lousy cocktail. I chuckled to myself, a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet of the night. The neon signs flickered in sync with my reverie, casting a kaleidoscope of colors on the rain-slick streets. My laughter was cut short by the remembrance of another ghost, my old partner Mikey. He was a good cop, until he wasn't. The job can do that to you. It takes more than it gives until you're left clutching at shadows. These reflections, darkly comic as they were, served as a smokescreen for the dread that clung to me like a second skin. They say loneliness is the human condition, but private eyes are a special breed. We're lonely by vocation. And as much as I tried to dress it up in humor, the truth was stark in my mind. I was chasing this killer not just to save others, but to save myself from the abyss that yawned within me. It was during one of these reflective nights, in the cold company of a bottle of bourbon, that a revelation came to me. It was about the tailor, about his pattern. He wasn't just killing at random. He was sewing a narrative, each victim a patch in a gruesome tapestry. What story was he trying to tell? And more importantly, what was my part in it? My determination to catch the tailor was as much about understanding his story as it was about ending it. I had to know the ending, even if it meant being the last line in his bloody book. But that's the thing about private eyes. We're suckers for a good story, especially if it's our own. With each step closer to the tailor, the weight of my own past seemed to grow heavier. But it was a weight I was used to carrying. It was, after all, the sum of all my stories. The failed cases, the lost loves, the missed chances. It was what made me relentless in the pursuit of others' stories. Maybe I was hoping that in solving theirs, I could somehow make sense of my own. So, with a wry smile and a heart heavy with ghosts, I plunged further into the neon-soaked night, ready to laugh in the face of despair and dance with my shadows once more. Because what's an investigator's life but a series of darkly comic interludes between the moments of stark, bloody reality? The city had a way of speaking in hushed tones, whispering secrets that were meant for the underbelly, not for the likes of decent folk. But I was no stranger to the city's murmurings. Lately, the whispers had turned into screams, screams that sliced through the night air, leaving their ragged edges in the minds of those who heard them. They spoke of girls, ones who vanished into the gaping maws of commercial warehouses down by the docks. It was said they went in but never came out. Not the same anyway. I had tried to turn a deaf ear, to lose myself in the bottom of a bottle, or the curves of a dame who didn't care to remember my name come morning. But the screams wouldn't let me. They echoed in my dreams, a cacophony of terror that wouldn't be silenced. So, I did what I do best. I started to nose around. The warehouses stood like silent sentinels, hulking giants of steel and concrete that kept their secrets well. But even they couldn't muffle the chilling cries that occasionally seeped out from their bowels. I prowled the area, my steps as silent as the grave, listening, waiting. My gut told me something was rotten, and it wasn't just the fish from the docks. Then, there was Warehouse 12. It was an oddity, an air-conditioned warehouse listed as abandoned in the city records. It didn't make sense, not in this part of town where every penny was pinched until it screamed for mercy. The building sat at the far end of the row, its exterior a canvas of peeling paint and graffiti. Yet, it hummed with the sound of heavy machinery, a heartbeat that didn't fit with the image of desolation it projected. I approached the warehouse under the cover of darkness, my footsteps cautious on the cracked asphalt. The front was locked tight, not that I expected any different. But as I circled around to the back, I found a vent, the metal grill carelessly left ajar. The scent that creeped out stopped me dead in my tracks, a putrid, cloying stench that spoke of decay and something far more sinister. It was the smell of fear and despair, of lives snuffed out and discarded like trash. My stomach churned, but I forced down the bile. This was no time for weakness. I pulled my collar up over my nose and slipped through the vent, my body tensing for whatever hell awaited me inside. The interior was a stark contrast to the warm summer night. It was cold, the air artificially chilled to preserve whatever lay within. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the dim light that flickered from overhead bulbs, casting long, dancing shadows. I moved slowly, my ears straining for any sound that would give away my presence. The main floor was a labyrinth of crates and machinery, a maze that seemed intentionally designed to disorient. As I navigated through the metallic forest, the smell became stronger, more oppressive. It clung to my clothes, my skin, filling my nostrils with the stench of death. Then I heard it, a low, muffled sobbing that cut through the silence. It was coming from the back, from a place where the shadows lay thickest. My hand went to the revolver at my hip. The cold metal a small comfort against the dread that clawed at my chest. The sobbing led me to a corner of the warehouse partitioned off by thick plastic sheeting. Behind it, the source of the stench became horrifyingly clear. Girls, no more than a handful of them, huddled together, their eyes wide with terror. They were the lucky ones, the ones still alive. Around them lay the evidence of those who weren't as fortunate. Bodies in various stages of decomposition, a tableau of horror that no living soul should ever witness. I felt the rage build within me, a fiery blaze that threatened to consume my being. This was the work of a monster, a fiend who preyed on the innocent and the helpless, and I had stumbled upon his den. The girls didn't notice me at first, too lost in their own misery. But as I stepped into the light, one of them looked up, her eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of hope there, a silent plea for salvation. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't turn away. I had to end this nightmare, to bring the bastard responsible to justice. I ushered the girls to the back, to a service door I had spotted on my way in. My plan was half-formed at best, get them out and come back for the son of a bitch later. But as we reached the door, a chilling realization dawned on me. The screams I had heard, the ones that led me here, they weren't just echoes of the past. They were warnings. The door was rigged, a trap meant to alert the warehouse's keeper to any attempted escape. As the alarm blared, cutting through the silence like a siren's wail, I knew our time had run out. I had walked us straight into a nightmarish trap, and it was closing in fast. I navigated the sea of despair, the girls having found the exit door and now a safe distance behind me, their whispers like prayers fading into the cold embrace of the night. The stench of the warehouse clung to my very soul, a grim reminder of the evil that men do. I knew then that I couldn't leave. Not yet. There was a reckoning to be had, a devil to face. And I felt him before I saw him, the architect of this horror, the man they called the Tailor. The chase had been a labyrinthine journey, every lead a dead end, every clue a trap. But it had led me here, to the heart of the maze, a derelict warehouse, where the shadows seemed to hold their breath, and the only sound was the drip, drip, drip of existential despair, like a leaky faucet in the still of midnight. The air was thick, a miasma of old blood and newer fears, the residue of terror that clung to the walls like mildew. I moved with purpose, my every step an act of defiance against the darkness that sought to engulf me. It was in the center of this concrete labyrinth that I found him, or perhaps he allowed himself to be found. The tailor stood as a tailor might, precise and proud, yet his instruments were not for cloth, but for flesh. His tape measure was a scalpel. His shears were sharpened not for fabric, but for sinew and skin. He had been cutting into his latest victim in his dastardly fashion when his dead eyes met mine. There was a moment, a fleeting sliver of time, where I saw him, truly saw him, devoid of humanity, a shell of a man possessed by total concentration and an unrestrained orgasmic enjoyment. He was upon his profane metal altar, sacrificing to his inner demonic god, when he looked up and saw me, his nemesis, his reckoning. Our eyes locked, and in that moment, the world seemed to shrink to the space between us. The air crackled with the electricity of recognition, two sides of the same tarnished coin. I saw in him the reflection of my own darkness, the abyss I had peered into for so long that it was starting to gaze back into me.
"Detective,"
he began, his voice a silky threat that slithered through the air.
"you've unraveled my stitches, pulled at the threads of my work. But why?"
His words were a noose, tightening with each syllable. I stood there, but while my gun was pointing at him, this was not a duel of guns, but of ghosts. My connection to the victims, each one a mirror to the broken parts of me. The parts that still clung to some shred of hope for redemption, was the real blade at his throat.
I'm not a detective, but I'll bring your ass in. You see them as chapters in your sick narrative.
I said, my voice steady, a contrast to the quicksand in my chest.
But they're not your story to tell. They're not footnotes in your manifesto of madness.
The tailor laughed, a sound that stitched the shadows tighter around us.
And you? What are you but a character in search of an ending?
He was right, of course. This was the climax of both his story and mine. I had been descending into this spiral for so long, chasing demons both without and within.
You're right.
I conceded, the heaviness of 1,000 sleepless nights etched into my voice.
But every story needs a conclusion, and yours ends here.
The finality of the words hung between us. A sentence passed. I had come to realize that in the pursuit of monsters, one risks becoming one. But on this night, in this place, I would not flinch. The tailor would weave no more tales of terror. The darkness would consume him, as it had almost consumed me. And as the first light of dawn crept through the broken windows, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for us both, I stepped forward, ready to cut the final thread. As I stood there, eyeing the tailor with the kind of focus that borders on the supernatural, I could feel the weight of the moment crushing the air from my lungs. It was a stalemate of minds before the clash of bodies, a pregnant pause in the symphony of our shared madness. Little by little we got closer to each other until the room twisted with our movements, reality contorting around the gravity of our duel. His blade, a tailored instrument of death, glinted in the dim light, a beacon of the end he sought to bring. My own weapon, a simple revolver, extension of my will, hung heavy in my hand. The tailor, knowing I didn't want to kill him but to take him in, gained courage to throw the first strike which caught me off guard and sent my gun about 10 feet away from me. Our waltz began in earnest then, a duet of destruction and survival. We were shadows flitting through the room, each strike, each parry, a verse in our violent poem. The tailor was adept, his movements as precise and cutting as his namesake tool. But I, fueled by the fire of justice, matched him. I carried a collapsible baton, and had been using that to fend off the powerful blows he was throwing at me. Each block, each twist, each turn was a defiance of his madness, a rejection of his narrative. I was the author now, rewriting the end he had envisioned. We spun and clashed, a crescendo of clashing wills echoing off the walls. The tailor fought with the desperation of a cornered beast, but his frenzy was his downfall. With a feint and a maneuver born from pure instinct, I shoved my baton into his right eye socket and made his body shake and trembled, and then closed the deal with a whack to the side of his head with all my enraged might. His weapon clattered to the ground, the sound an epitaph to his reign of terror. But victory was a bitter potion. In his defeat, the tailor lunged with a concealed blade, a final act of defiance. The sharp sting across my abdomen was overshadowed by the adrenaline. I watched him collapse, a puppet with cut strings, his eyes still leaking blood and liquid but burning with unspoken curses. And as the room began to spin, the edges of my vision darkening, I felt the warm embrace of blood seeping from my wound. I had captured the monster. But at what cost? As darkness claimed me, I fell beside him, the two of us bound by the twisted tale that had led us here. Our dance was over, but the music, the haunting melody of consequences, played on. I closed my eyes, succumbing to the void, a single thought echoing in my mind. Justice, at last, had been served. Several days later, when I wake, I'm lying on a hospital bed with an immense pain in my abs. It was hurting just to think. Gigi was there, by my bed, of all people. She filled me in the details on how the police arrived and saw us both passed out. Apparently one of the working girls had called the cops, and thanks to that, I'm alive. No real damage to my internal organs other than to my pride and my poor excuse of a dad bod. She told me he was taken without a struggle. His den of murder was seized and shut down. And as the sun rose on a new day, I realized that this case, this maze, had been a mirror. In finding the tailor, in confronting him, I had confronted something in myself. The labyrinth wasn't just his making. It was mine too. And maybe, just maybe, I'd found my way out. The dim glow of the neon sign outside the bar flickered like a beacon as I pushed open the door to my perennial refuge. The place was empty, save for Gigi and the ghosts of conversations past. I found solace in its familiarity. The musty smell, the creak of the bar stool, the gentle clink of glassware. It was the same, yet I was changed. I didn't order my usual. Instead, I asked for water, clear and cold, something to cleanse the palate of the bitter aftertaste left by the tailor's case. Gigi nodded, accustomed to the ebbs and flows of my habits. As I sipped, my mind wandered through the city's endless cycle. Crime, like the night, was a constant. The city's indifference to individual suffering was its survival mechanism. It couldn't afford to care, lest it be consumed by the weight of its collective despair. The tailor was one thread pulled from the tapestry, but the weave was complex, intricate, and unending. I had cut one thread, yet the loom continued its work, the spindle spinning, the shuttle weaving in and out. Violence was a pattern, a design repeated with variations in color and texture, but always the same at its core. I pondered my place in it all. Was I a weaver, a mere thread? Or was I the scissors, futilely snipping away in the hope of altering the pattern? The thought was a weight, a burden I carried with every step through this concrete labyrinth. The bar began to fill, the night crowd seeking their own escape, their own solace. Laughter and chatter replaced the silence. Life went on, relentless and unabashed. And so would I. There would be other cases, other puzzles to solve. But for now, I was content to be an observer, to let the world spin without my interference, if only for a moment. As I stood to leave, I tossed a few bills on the bar. Gigi, having caught my eye, replied with a silent acknowledgement between kindred spirits. The night was young, and the city called. Its siren song was a lullaby and a rallying cry all at once. I stepped out into the crisp night air, the neon sign casting a red haze over the sidewalk. The story would go on, my narrative intertwining with the city's. The next misadventure awaited, a story yet to be told, a mystery yet to be unraveled. The end was inconclusive, as all things are in a world where the only certainty is uncertainty. I walked away from the bar, my footsteps a soft percussion in the symphony of the city night, my search for meaning as unresolved as the cases that awaited me.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Quantum Dispatches and stay tuned next week for another thrilling adventure. Thank you for listening.